I always thought I was the perfect mother. For 25 years, I believed that every please and thank you from my daughter Emily was proof of my success. Every compliment from neighbors about her impeccable manners felt like a medal pinned to my chest. Margaret Wilson, they'd say. You've raised such a wonderful girl. If only they knew the truth I discovered that cold October evening. My name is Margaret Wilson, and I spent 30 years as a kindergarten teacher before retiring to focus entirely on being Emily's mother. Looking back now, I realize I never stopped being a teacher, even at home. Every interaction with my daughter was a lesson plan, every behavior a curriculum to master. When Emily said, "May I please have some water?" instead of just, "I'm thirsty," I felt victorious. When she thanked me for dinner every single night without being reminded, I thought I'd cracked the code of parenting. Emily grew up in our pristine suburban home in Ohio, where every surface gleamed and every schedule ran like clockwork. Breakfast at 7:30 sharp, homework reviewed by me at 4 o'clock, dinner as a family at 6 with proper conversation about her day. I taught her to sit up straight, speak clearly, and never interrupt adults. By age 8, she could fold napkins properly and knew which fork to use for salad. Other parents marveled at how well-behaved she was during play dates, how she always cleaned up without being asked, how she never threw tantrums in stores. "You're so lucky," my sister Carol would say during family gatherings. "Emily's like a little adult. I can barely get my kids to say hello." I'd smile proudly, watching Emily sit quietly with her hands folded while her cousins ran around screaming. She'd answer questions from relatives with full sentences and perfect posture. "Thank you for asking. School is going very well. I'm learning about the solar system." Never just good or fine like other kids. When Emily started dating in high school, she brought her boyfriend home exactly when I asked her to. She introduced him properly. They sat in the living room with the door open, and she walked him to the door with a polite handshake. None of this sneaking around or attitude that other parents complained about. My daughter respected boundaries, understood expectations, and never gave me a moment's worry. College acceptance letters arrived, and Emily chose the state university I'd subtly guided her toward. Not too far, not too expensive, with a solid education program because teaching runs in our family. She called every Sunday at 2 o'clock, updated me on her grades, and came home for every holiday with a smile and stories about her studies. When she graduated with honors, I felt like I was collecting my own diploma. After college, Emily moved to Cincinnati for a marketing job just 2 hours away. Perfect distance. Close enough for monthly visits, far enough for independence. She dated occasionally, bringing home young men who were polite, but somehow never quite right. "I'm being selective, Mom," she'd say when I'd gently ask about her social life. "I want to find someone who shares my values." My values, I'd think with satisfaction. But something began shifting during her mid-20s. The phone calls became shorter. The visits felt more formal. Emily would arrive with that same perfect smile, help with dinner, engage in pleasant conversation, and leave without any real connection happening. I told myself this was normal. She was growing up, becoming independent. Wasn't this what good parenting was supposed to produce? 2 years passed with minimal contact. A few text messages, holiday cards, brief calls that felt more like obligation than affection. I convinced myself she was just busy building her career. Successful daughters don't need their mothers constantly, right? I'd raised her to be self-sufficient. Then came that October evening when Emily called to say she was coming home for the weekend. My heart jumped with excitement. Finally, real time together. I planned her favorite meals, cleaned her old room until it sparkled, and bought fresh flowers for the kitchen table. When she walked through the door, she looked beautiful but somehow distant, like she was seeing our house for the first time. "Hello, Mother. Thank you for having me. The house looks lovely as always." Even her hug felt rehearsed, arms barely touching my shoulders before pulling away. But she was here, and she was being pleasant, so I pushed down the strange feeling in my chest. Dinner went perfectly. Emily complimented every dish, asked about my book club, shared updates about her job in that careful, articulated way she'd always spoken. We discussed the weather, local news, my neighbor's new garden. Safe topics, polite conversation. Everything I'd taught her was proper dinner discussion. More potatoes, Emily? No, thank you, Mother. Everything was delicious. May I help with the dishes? Even doing dishes together felt like a choreographed dance. Emily washed while I dried, both of us maintaining that pleasant rhythm we'd perfected over the years. She asked about my arthritis. I asked about her apartment. She mentioned a new restaurant she'd tried. I told her about the church fundraiser. Normal mother-daughter conversation, yet somehow I felt like I was talking to a well-mannered stranger. Saturday morning, Emily helped me reorganize the linen closet without being asked. She folded each towel with military precision, exactly the way I'd taught her as a child. "Is this spacing correct, Mother?" she asked, arranging the washcloths by color gradient. It was perfect, just like everything else she did. So why did I feel so empty watching her? That evening, Emily was in her old room making phone calls while I prepared snacks in the kitchen. I wasn't intentionally eavesdropping, but our house has thin walls, and I couldn't help overhearing her conversation. What I heard made my world tilt off its axis. "Yeah, I'm at my mother's house for the weekend." Her voice sounded different, looser, more alive than I'd heard it sound in years. "No, it's fine. I just go into performance mode, you know? Smile, say the right things, help around the house. She loves it when I'm the perfect daughter." I froze, a handful of crackers scattered across the counter. My mother? She never really knew me, honestly. I've been performing this role for so long, I think she actually believes this is who I am. But I figured out pretty early that being myself wasn't what she wanted. She wanted a little reflection of her own perfectness. The crackers crunched under my trembling fingers. I remember being maybe 7 or 8, trying to tell her about this kid at school who was mean to me. But instead of comforting me, she started coaching me on how to respond properly. "Use your words, Emily. Stand up straight when you speak. Thank them for the learning opportunity." I just wanted my mom to hug me and tell me it was okay to feel hurt. My legs gave out. I sank into the kitchen chair, still listening to my daughter's voice from upstairs. So I learned to only show her the parts she could approve of. Happy Emily, grateful Emily, well-behaved Emily. It was easier than dealing with her disappointment when I was just human. And after a while, I forgot how to be anything else around her. The phone call continued, but I couldn't process the words anymore. 25 years of what I thought was successful mothering suddenly looked completely different. Every please and thank you I'd been so proud of wasn't genuine gratitude, it was survival. Every compliment about her behavior wasn't a reflection of good parenting. It was evidence that my child had learned to hide herself so thoroughly that even I couldn't find her. Emily came downstairs later that evening, carrying the same pleasant smile she'd worn all weekend. "Mother, I've prepared a grocery list of items you're running low on. Would you like me to pick them up tomorrow before I leave?" I stared at her face, searching for any crack in that polite mask, any glimpse of the daughter who'd just poured her heart out to a friend upstairs. But she maintained that perfect composure, waiting patiently for my response as if she hadn't just shattered everything I believed about our relationship. "That would be lovely, dear, thank you." "Of course. Is there anything else I can help with this evening?" The formal politeness felt like a knife between my ribs. This beautiful, accomplished young woman standing in my kitchen was a stranger. Worse than a stranger, she was a person I'd trained to disappear. That night, I lay in bed replaying every interaction we'd had over the years. How many times had she tried to show me who she really was? How many moments of genuine emotion had I corrected away? I remembered her at age 5 crying over a broken toy, and me saying, "Let's use this as an opportunity to practice gratitude for the toys we still have." I remembered her at 12, excited about a story she'd written, and me focusing on her grammar mistakes instead of the creativity. I remembered her at 16, trying to talk to me about feeling overwhelmed at school, and me responding with a lecture about time management and proper priorities. Every memory felt poisoned now, every proud moment tainted by the realization that I'd been celebrating my daughter's ability to perform rather than her courage to be real. Sunday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching the storm in my chest. Emily appeared for breakfast perfectly dressed, thanking me for the orange juice and commenting on how nice the table looked. She helped pack her overnight bag with the same careful precision she applied to everything else, folding her clothes in neat squares and checking that she hadn't forgotten anything. "Thank you for a wonderful weekend, Mother. I hope we can do this again soon." She hugged me goodbye with that same careful distance, her arms touching my shoulders for exactly 3 seconds before pulling away. Professional, polite, empty. I watched her car pull out of the driveway, her hand waving through the window in a gesture as choreographed as everything else about our relationship. As her taillights disappeared around the corner, I felt the full weight of what I'd lost. Not recently. I'd lost her years ago. Maybe decades ago. I'd just been too blind to see it. The house felt cavernous in a way it never had before. Every perfectly arranged room seemed to mock me. The dining room where we'd shared thousands of proper conversations without ever really talking. The living room where she'd sat with perfect posture for years while her real self remained hidden. Her bedroom, preserved exactly as she'd left it for college, now felt like a museum to a daughter who'd never actually existed. I found myself standing in her doorway, looking at the carefully arranged books on her shelves, the awards and certificates covering her walls, the photos of her smiling that same careful smile in every single one. Even as a child, she'd learned to smile on command, to pose properly, to be what I wanted to see. When had I stopped seeing her and started seeing only my own reflection? When had I become so invested in the appearance of perfect motherhood that I'd forgotten to actually mother the child in front of me? The questions multiplied in my mind like cancer cells, spreading through every memory and poisoning every moment of pride I'd ever felt. The neighbor who'd complimented Emily's manners hadn't been praising my parenting. They'd been witnessing a child's desperate attempt to stay safe by being invisible. The teachers who'd called her a pleasure to have in class weren't celebrating her authentic self. They were applauding a little girl who'd learned that love was conditional on good behavior. Standing in that room, surrounded by the evidence of my daughter's perfect performance, I finally understood what I'd done. I hadn't raised a child. I'd created a prisoner. And the prison walls were built from my expectations, my corrections, my constant need for her to reflect my idea of success rather than discover her own. The daughter I'd been so proud of didn't exist. She never had. In my quest to create the perfect child, I'd erased the real one completely. The weeks following Emily's visit blurred together in a haze of regret and sleepless nights. I wandered through my house like a ghost, seeing everything differently. The family photos lining the hallway showed Emily's progression from a chubby-cheeked toddler to a poised young woman, but now I could see what I'd missed before. In every single picture, even as early as age 4, her smile looked practiced, performed. How had I never noticed that her eyes never quite matched the curve of her lips? I stopped answering calls from neighbors asking about Emily. What could I say? That my perfect daughter was actually a master of disguise. That 25 years of what I thought was successful parenting had been an elaborate performance designed to keep me happy while keeping her safe. The truth felt too enormous and too shameful to speak aloud. 3 weeks after her visit, while mindlessly sorting through old boxes in the attic, I found something that changed everything. Tucked between Emily's elementary school report cards and my collection of her honor roll certificates was a small journal with a purple cover, slightly warped from humidity and forgotten time. The cover read, "Emily's Private Thoughts," in her careful 10-year-old handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. I knew I was violating her privacy, but I was desperate to understand when I'd lost her, when the real Emily had learned to hide so completely that even her own mother couldn't find her. The first entry was dated 3 days after her 10th birthday. I remembered that birthday, the perfect princess party I'd planned, with pink decorations and carefully orchestrated games. Every child had been well behaved. Every activity had gone according to schedule. I'd been so proud of how smoothly everything had run. But Emily's words told a different story. Mom planned my whole party without asking what I wanted. I wanted to have a science party with experiments and stuff, but she said that wasn't appropriate for young ladies. Sarah Mitchell asked if we could play capture the flag in the backyard, but Mom said it would mess up our dresses. I had to smile and pretend I loved everything, but I just wanted to dig in the dirt and look for bugs like the boys get to do. When I tried to tell Mom after everyone left, she said I should write thank you notes instead of complaining, so I'm writing in here instead. The next entry, a week later, made my chest tighten. I got a B+ on my math test today. Mom asked why it wasn't an A. She didn't say good job or anything, just asked what I did wrong. Tommy Peterson got a C, and his mom took him for ice cream to celebrate because he usually gets Ds. I wish Mom would be proud of B+ sometimes. But she says Wilson women always excel, so I have to try harder next time. Page after page revealed a child desperately trying to please a mother who kept moving the goalpost of approval. I read about school days when Emily felt sad or confused but learned to answer, "How was your day?" with wonderful "thank you for asking," because anything less than wonderful meant a lecture about maintaining a positive attitude. I read about times she wanted to cry but held it in because I'd taught her that crying was for babies who couldn't use their words properly. One entry from when she was 12 hit me like a physical blow. Mom found my story about the dragon who didn't want to be scary. She said it was very creative, but then spent an hour correcting my grammar and telling me how to make it more appropriate. She kept saying, "What would people think if they read this?" I don't understand why people's thoughts matter more than my thoughts. I just wanted her to like my story the way it was. Now I don't want to write stories anymore. I remembered that day. I remembered being so pleased that Emily was developing writing skills, and I'd thought I was being helpful by editing her work. But what she'd needed was encouragement, not correction. She'd needed a mother who celebrated her imagination, not one who immediately tried to improve it. The entries grew shorter and more careful as Emily got older, as if she was learning to censor even her private thoughts. By age 14, most entries were just factual summaries. Got A on history test, Mom pleased, did homework, helped with dinner. The real Emily, the one who'd once written passionate pages about wanting to explore the woods behind our house or wondering why grown-ups were afraid of getting dirty, had disappeared even from her own journal. The last entry was dated 2 weeks before she left for college. I feel like I'm disappearing. Sometimes I look in the mirror and don't recognize myself. I've gotten so good at being what Mom wants that I don't remember what I want anymore. Maybe college will help me figure out who I really am when no one is watching. I hope I still exist somewhere under all this politeness. I closed the journal and sat in that dusty attic, surrounded by boxes of Emily's achievements and accolades, crying for the first time in years. Not the careful, dignified tears I'd learned were appropriate for women of my generation, but ugly, gasping sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep in my bones. My perfect daughter had been screaming silently for years, and I'd been too busy congratulating myself on her excellent behavior to hear her. That night, I made the phone call that would change everything. My hands shook as I dialed 911, and when the dispatcher answered, I almost hung up. How do you explain to a stranger that you need to report yourself for a crime that no court would recognize? 911, what's your emergency? My voice cracked. I need to report a crime. I think I've killed someone. Ma'am, where are you located? Are you injured? Is someone else injured? I'm at 47 Maple Street in Riverside. No one is physically hurt, but I think I killed my daughter. Not physically, but I killed who she really was. I trained her to disappear, and now I don't know how to find her." There was a pause. I could hear the dispatcher typing. "Ma'am, I'm going to send an officer to your location. Can you stay on the line with me?" 20 minutes later, Officer Janet Martinez sat in my living room, looking both concerned and confused as I tried to explain what I'd discovered. She was younger than Emily, probably around 26, with kind eyes and an infinite patience for a rambling old woman who'd called the police to confess to emotional crimes. "Mrs. Wilson," she said gently, after I'd finished my disjointed explanation, "what you're describing sounds like a very painful realization about your relationship with your daughter, but it's not a crime that we can arrest you for." "But I stole her childhood," I insisted. "I stole her ability to be herself. I created a person who doesn't exist and convinced my real daughter that she wasn't worth knowing." Officer Martinez leaned forward. "Have you considered that recognizing this might be the first step toward changing it?" Her words planted a seed that would eventually grow into action, but that night I felt hopeless. How do you apologize for stealing someone's identity? How do you give back 25 years of being yourself when the person you damaged has learned to live without it? The officer left after making sure I wasn't a danger to myself, and I spent the rest of the night reading Emily's journal again, trying to map exactly where I'd gone wrong. When morning came, I knew what I had to do. I started with the house. Every room held evidence of my need for control, my insistence on perfection, my belief that appearances mattered more than authenticity. The living room with its pristine white furniture that Emily had never been allowed to relax on. The dining room where we'd shared thousands of proper meals without ever having an improper conversation. The kitchen where I'd taught her to cook, not for joy, but for performance. It took 3 months to sell everything. The realtor, Mrs. Chen, seemed puzzled by my urgency to leave such a beautiful home, but I couldn't explain that every perfectly arranged room felt like a crime scene now. The new owners were a young couple with 2 small children who walked through the house talking about how their kids could play in the backyard and draw on the basement walls. I signed the papers with relief, knowing the house would finally contain the kind of messy, authentic life it was meant for. With the proceeds from the sale, I moved to Cedar Falls, a small college town 3 hours away where nobody knew Margaret Wilson, the woman who'd raised the perfect daughter. I found a tiny apartment above a bookstore and for the first time in my adult life, bought furniture without caring what anyone else would think. A bright blue couch that invited sprawling, a kitchen table with visible wear marks from decades of real use, bookshelves that I filled with poetry and novels instead of just educational materials and parenting guides. I started volunteering at the local community center, teaching art classes to children whose parents dropped them off in paint-stained clothes and picked them up covered in glitter. These kids talked back, asked impossible questions, and created art that made no sense to adult eyes but pulsed with pure creative energy. 8-year-old Marcus painted his family as abstract shapes in colors that didn't exist in nature. 6-year-old Sophia sculpted animals that were part horse, part dragon, part something entirely from her imagination. "Mrs. Wilson," little Amy asked during my second week, "why do you cry sometimes when we show you our pictures?" I knelt down to her level, this fearless 7-year-old with paint in her hair and joy in her eyes. "Because your pictures are exactly what they're supposed to be," I told her. "They're yours." Teaching these children was like learning a new language. Instead of correcting their techniques, I learned to ask them about their choices. Instead of suggesting improvements, I learned to say, "Tell me about this part," and watch their faces light up as they explained their creative decisions. Instead of pushing them toward predetermined outcomes, I learned to follow their lead and be amazed by where they took me. Every evening I went home to my small apartment and wrote letters to Emily. Not emails or texts that demanded immediate responses, but actual letters on paper that required thought and intention. I didn't know her current address, so I sent them to her old workplace, hoping they would eventually find their way to her. The first letter was 7 pages of apology. I told her about finding her journal, about recognizing the damage I'd done, about understanding finally that her perfect manners had been a prison I'd built around her authentic self. I told her she didn't need to respond, that I wasn't writing to make myself feel better or to demand forgiveness. I was writing because she deserved to know that someone finally saw what had been hidden for so long. The second letter, sent a week later, was shorter. I told her about the art classes, about learning to celebrate mess and imperfection. I told her about a little boy named Jake who'd cried when his painting didn't look like the example I'd shown, and how I'd learned to say, "Your way is more interesting than mine," instead of offering corrections. Week after week, I wrote letters describing my new life, my growing understanding of authentic relationship, my daily practice of unlearning the harmful lessons I'd internalized about control and perfection. I wrote about books I was reading on emotional development, about therapy sessions with Dr. Rebecca Stevens, who was helping me understand how my own childhood had shaped my parenting style. I never expected responses. These letters weren't attempts at reconciliation. They were evidence of change, proof that I was becoming someone different than the mother who'd raised Emily to disappear. 18 months into my new life, on a Tuesday evening in April, my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and my heart jumped with the kind of anxiety that had become familiar since recognizing how profoundly I'd failed as a mother. Emily stood on my doorstep, but she looked different. Her hair was shorter, styled in a way that looked effortless rather than controlled. She wore jeans with paint stains and a sweater that was clearly chosen for comfort rather than appearance. But the biggest difference was her face. There was something alive in her expression that I hadn't seen since she was very small. "Hello, Mom." Not mother in that careful, distant way she'd always spoken to me. Just Mom, with a voice that sounded real. "Emily." I stepped back, unsure whether to invite her in or wait for her to explain why she'd come. "I got your letters." She held up a small stack of envelopes, some of them worn from being read multiple times. All 37 of them. We stood there for a moment, 2 women who'd lived in the same house for 18 years, but were meeting each other for the first time. "I came to say thank you," Emily continued, and her voice carried an emotion I couldn't identify. "Not for the apologies, though those mattered, but for finally admitting that you were wrong. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had permission to be wrong, too." She came inside, and we sat on my blue couch that encouraged relaxation rather than perfect posture. Emily tucked her legs under her in a way that would have made me correct her posture automatically just 2 years earlier. "I've been in therapy," she said. "Started about 6 months after I found out you'd moved here. I kept thinking about that weekend at the house and how empty I felt pretending to be perfect for you, Doctor. Morrison helped me understand that I wasn't angry at you for trying to make me perfect. I was angry at myself for believing I had to be perfect to deserve love. I wanted to interrupt, to apologize again, to somehow fix, with words, what I'd broken with years of conditional approval. But I'd learned something in those art classes about the importance of listening without trying to direct the conversation. "The letters showed me that you were changing," Emily continued. "Really changing, not just saying the right words. When you wrote about letting that kid paint outside the lines and calling it beautiful instead of wrong, I cried for about 3 hours because I realized that maybe there was hope for us to know each other for real." We talked for hours that night. Not the careful, polite conversation we'd perfected over the years, but messy, honest communication that included pauses and uncertainty and emotions that couldn't be tied up in neat packages. Emily told me about the panic attacks she'd had in college when professors criticized her work because she'd learned to interpret any correction as complete failure. She told me about relationships that had failed because she couldn't bear to let anyone see her when she wasn't performing perfectly. I told her about my own mother, who'd raised me to believe that children should be seen and not heard, that emotions were signs of weakness, that a woman's worth was measured by her ability to maintain a beautiful home and well-behaved family. I explained how I'd thought I was improving on my mother's methods by praising Emily's good behavior, not realizing I was still making love conditional on performance. "I don't know how to be in a relationship without performing," Emily admitted as the evening wound down. "I'm still learning how to disagree with people, how to have bad days, how to ask for what I need instead of just being grateful for whatever I get." "I don't know how to be a mother without trying to fix everything," I replied. "I'm still learning how to love someone exactly as they are instead of as they could become." Emily stayed for the weekend and we practiced being imperfect together. She helped me teach the Saturday art class at the community center, and I watched her encourage a shy 9-year-old to add more purple to her painting, because purple makes you happy and that's what matters. When she burned the eggs at breakfast, I managed not to suggest a better technique. When I started to reorganize her overnight bag out of habit, she gently asked me to stop, and I did. On Sunday afternoon, as she prepared to leave, Emily hugged me differently than she had in decades. Not the careful, timed embrace of politeness, but a real hug that lasted as long as it needed to. "I can't promise this will be easy," she said. "I might need time when this feels like too much, and you might slip back into old patterns when you're stressed." "I know," I replied. "We're both still learning. But I want to try. I want to see if we can build something real instead of just maintaining something that looks good." Emily drove away that Sunday evening, but this time her goodbye felt like a beginning rather than an ending. We'd made plans for her to visit again in a month, and I'd promised to keep writing letters, to keep sharing my journey of learning to love without controlling. 6 months later, Emily called to tell me she was dating someone new. "His name is David, and he's kind of a mess," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "He forgets to do laundry and burns dinner sometimes and talks too loud when he's excited. But he thinks I'm beautiful when I first wake up and my hair is crazy, and he never makes me feel like I need to be anyone other than exactly who I am." The old Margaret would have asked about his job prospects, his family background, his plans for the future. But the mother I was becoming just said, "He sounds wonderful. I can't wait to meet him." Emily brought David home for Thanksgiving, and our dinner was beautifully imperfect. The turkey was slightly dry, David spilled gravy on his shirt, and Emily laughed so hard at one of his stories that she snorted, which made all of us laugh even harder. There were no scripted conversations about current events or career achievements. Instead, we told embarrassing stories and debated whether pineapple belonged on pizza and played board games that got competitive in the best way. As I watched Emily argue passionately about her Monopoly strategy, her face animated and unguarded, I saw glimpses of the child she might have been if I'd known then what I was learning now. But I also saw the woman she was becoming. Someone who'd survived a childhood of performance and was choosing authenticity in spite of everything that had tried to train it out of her. That night, as Emily and David settled into the guest room and I cleaned up the dinner dishes, I felt something I'd never experienced as a parent, the deep satisfaction of knowing my child not because she was reflecting my expectations, but because she was courageously being herself. The perfect daughter I'd been so proud of had been a ghost. The real Emily, messy, opinionated, vulnerable, and beautifully human, was worth getting to know,